Good evening, everyone. The clock has ticked a little past 7:30, so we might make a start so that, it being a Monday night, people can head back home. I greet you all with the Islamic greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. On behalf of the Australian National Imams Council, I welcome each of you today. I welcome our esteemed guests, Mufti of Australia, the Honourable State Members of Parliament who have come today, the Honourable Federal Members of Parliament, councillors, representatives of various law enforcement agencies, New South Wales Police, Australian Federal Police, Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, ambassadors, imams, religious leaders from other faiths, community leaders, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters and friends. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge that we gather in peace on Indigenous land. I pay my respects to their elders and leaders, past, present and emerging. They are a significant aspect of our identity as Australians, and we need to embrace this history and all the other migrant threads which are woven to make the country we call Australia. So I greet you all in peace, salams. We come together today in peace, for peace. We remember a sad day, a day which has been etched into our collective memories. It is a day on which the most significant terrorist event for our country occurred. It was close to home, and indeed the perpetrator was an Australian. In following the example of the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, I shall not repeat his name. It is a day on which the peace of so many people in New Zealand was shattered forever. Many others, including in Australia, became gripped with a paralysing fear at the very notion of attending at a mosque to pray. We will hear some of this today. It was a day on which men, women and children had performed their ablution and were readying to go to the mosque to participate in the weekly Friday congregational prayer, as they did most Fridays. And they stood in line together beseeching God for forgiveness and well-being for themselves and others. As they did, so many of them were gunned down, and the event was live-streamed on Facebook for the world to witness, like some shooting game playing out on the computer screens. Yet, on this day, there was no game. Instead, there were 51 people mercilessly murdered without any opportunity to defend themselves. Many more were seriously injured. The trauma, the loss, the pain continues to this day. For many, it's very real. We gather and remember and hope that the sadness, pain and horror of what occurred can motivate us to be better and stronger in the steps we take to stamp out hate and violence against anyone, including based on their religious identity, whatever that religion may be. We pray that together we can be more assertive in resisting hate and protecting against the language and the conduct which created an enabling environment for the violence which finally played out on 15 March 2019. It didn't occur in a vacuum. society had allowed that hate to fester, including publicly, on social media and other places, until it manifested in a murderous rage and destroyed many lives forever. As always in history, including events of utter sadness, pain and horror, we look to for our lessons, and through gatherings like tonight, commemorate those who have sacrificed their lives. And so your presence this evening is important and is much appreciated. We have a brief program this evening during which we will hear from various speakers. There's an agenda on everyone's chair. And following that, we will end by reciting the names of those who were murdered and participate in a collective supplication for them and us. On that note, I'll ask Brother Anas Yakmur to begin tonight's proceedings with a recitation of the Quran, the holy book of Muslims.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير صدق الله العظيم. O humanity, indeed we created you from a male and a female and made you into people and tribes so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most noble of you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most righteous among you. Allah is truly all-knowing, all-aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Anas. I will now ask the President of the Australian National Imams Council, Sheikh Shadi Al Sulaiman, to come forward and share a few words and provide an official welcome.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. All praise be to Allah and peace be upon the Messenger of Allah, our esteemed guests, Mufti of Australia, Dr. Ibrahim Muhammad, state MPs, ministers, political leaders and representatives, councillors, government officials, law enforcement agencies, New South Wales Police, Australian Federal Police, ambassadors, diplomats, imams, religious leaders from all faiths, community leaders, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, and all guests. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be upon you all. On behalf of the Australian National Imams Council, I welcome you all to the second Christchurch Massacre Commemoration 2021. On Friday 15th of March 2019, two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, were attacked by one gunman, a right-wing extremist and a terrorist. 51 people died and an equal number were injured on that day. The world continues to suffer the pain and trauma of that horrific day, in particular the Muslim community. I still remember that moment, finding out this extreme event. It was exactly 2 years ago from now, Friday the 15th of March, minutes before I entered the mosque to deliver my own Friday sermon to my fellow Australian Muslims here in Australia. They too also came to attend the Friday prayers as their brothers and sisters in Christchurch. It was so close to home. Actually, too close when it emerged that the perpetrator, unfortunately, was an Australian. 100 people were shot, 51 killed, and an equal number injured. One of the worst massacres in this day and age. They were shot, they were killed for one reason, and one reason only, and that's because they were Muslims. Muslims like me and many others in this room. The perpetrator was radicalized by a dangerous, far-right extreme views and white supremacy ideology that led to this extreme massacre and tragedy. An ideology that existed and continues to exist. An ideology that is a great threat to all, a threat to our peace, a threat to our diversity, and a threat to our coexistence. This threat must be countered and defied. It must be countered by all and must not be tolerated at all. It must be countered by political leaders and religious leaders, by the law enforcement agencies, by the media, by every single citizen and human being on the face of this earth. The Christchurch Massacre taught us all and the entire world that terrorism does not have a race. Terrorism does not have a color, and terrorism does not have a religion. It also taught us that Islamophobia is real and extremely dangerous. With all this real threat before us, we come together tonight to show a strong and unbeatable defiance against those who seek to divide us, against hate towards those who are different in skin color, faith, or race. We are here tonight to send a strong message that the blood of the Christchurch victims will not go in vain. Tonight is a night of unity, a night of solidarity, a night of defiance against all form of extremism. Once again, on behalf of the Australian National Imams Council and the Australian Muslim community, we welcome you all to the second Christchurch Massacre Commemoration 2021, and we sincerely thank you for your ongoing support and display of solidarity and unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheikh Shadi. I will now ask His Eminence Mufti of Australia, Dr. Abu Ibrahim, to please come up. He will address us in Arabic, and he will also then be followed by Imam Ahmed Abdul, who will give a translation.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. بداية أشكركم على حضوركم ومشاركتكم لنا في هذه الذكرى الأليمة. السيدات والسادة، في البداية أود التأكيد على مجموعة من الحقائق تحمينا من الوقوع في شرك التعميم، حيث تردد لدى بعض الجهات وفي بعض المؤسسات أن الإرهابي الذي فعل الجريمة في نيوزيلندا كان أسترالياً. أود التأكيد أننا في المجتمع الأسترالي لن تستطيع العنصرية ولن تستطيع الكراهية ولن يستطيع الإرهاب أن يمزق وحدتنا وأن يلعب بنسيجنا الاجتماعي. نحن في أستراليا نعلم أننا في موطن حر، ونعلم أن هذا الموطن الحر يحترم التعددية الثقافية والحضارية والدينية، ويحترم حريات الناس، ويتعامل مع البشر على أنهم سواسية. لذلك أحذر من التعميم في تلك النقطة. ثانياً، الإسلاموفوبيا ليست وليدة اليوم، ومن ثم فوجدان الجاني، وجدان المجرم الذي ارتكب الجريمة لم يتكون بين عشية وضحاها، وإنما كان نتيجة لكم هائل من التصريحات الإعلامية والسياسية ساهم فيها مفكرون قدامى، وساهم فيها إعلاميون وسياسيون محدثون. هذا الكم الهائل من العبث الثقافي والعبث بالمجتمعات والعبث بأمن الأمة شكل وجدان الجاني وعبأ نفسيته الحاقدة بكثير من الكراهية مما دفعه لارتكاب هذه الجريمة. ثالثاً، نقلت وكالات الأنباء بعد التحقيقات بعد وقوع المجزرة أن الجاني كان معجباً بأفكار بعض السياسيين الكبار في العالم، ومنهم الرئيس رونالد ترامب، كما كان معجباً بأفكار كامو وأندري بريفيك، وهو نرويجي قتل 70 شخصاً في مسبحة أشبه بمسبحة نيوزيلندا. ثالثاً، عندما نشأت مصطلحات الإرهاب والتطرف والعنف تبنتها قنوات ومؤسسات بحثية وحصرت المصطلح في الإسلام وحده وفي المسلمين وحدهم، وكأن الجنون له دين، وكأن الجنون له وطن، وكأن الجنون له جنس. رابعاً، تصاعدت شعبية اليمين المتطرف في كثير من بلدان العالم، ونفذ إلى مراكز القرار بعض المتطرفين، ووصل بعضهم إلى رئاسة بعض الدول. ومن ثم فإذا كان الإرهاب وإذا كان التطرف وإذا كان العنف في مجتمعات الشرق فهو أيضاً في مجتمعات الغرب، لكن الفرق بين الأمرين أن المتطرفين في الشرق خارج القانون، فهم إما في السجون والمعتقلات، وإما يعيشون في الكهوف أو في قمم الجبال هاربين، بينما هم في الغرب يمسكون بزمام المبادرة، وهم الذين يشرعون وهم الذين يفتون، وتلك هي الخطورة. لذلك أنتهز هذه المناسبة وأقول لكل مراكز القرار وأقول لكل العقلاء في أستراليا وفي غيرها، أقول إن المجتمع الذي يغض الطرف عن العنصرية والكراهية والتطرف ويتعامل بازدواج المعايير بين الفاعل الجاني في الجناية المتساوية، المجتمع الذي يفعل ذلك يفقد أوليات الأمان ويفقد أوليات الوقاية ويفقد أوليات المساواة، ومن ثم فهذا المجتمع لن يحتاج إلى إرهاب مستورد، لأن الذين يعيشون فيه قد فقدوا كل ضوابط الولاء والانتماء. خامساً وأخيراً، إذا كانت العنصرية لها هذا المدى من الخطورة، وإذا كان العقلاء في العالم قد أنشأوا تحالفاً يضم 68 دولة من دول العالم، وفي مقدمتها السبع الكبار، إذا كان العالم قد أنشأ لمحاربة داعش تحالفاً يضم 68 دولة، ألا تستحق دعوات الكراهية والعنصرية والإسلاموفوبيا التي تدعو إلى القتل وتحرض الناس على التمزق وعلى الحروب الأهلية، ألا تستحق أن ينشئ الحلفاء تحالفاً ضد العنصرية والكراهية؟ وأخيراً أقول إن كل أمنيات الأحرار وكل أمنيات الشرفاء يتمنون أن يحمى الله أستراليا شعباً وأرضاً وبشراً، وأن يربط قلوب من يعيشون فيها ويسكنون أرضها بالمحبة والسلام، وأن ينعم العالم كله في داخل أستراليا وخارجها وفي كل أرض الله بالسلام والوئام والاستقرار، وأن تنتهي من قواميس الدنيا مصطلحات الكراهية والعنصرية والإسلاموفوبيا. سلمكم الله، وسلم الله أستراليا أرضاً وشعباً وبشراً وكائنات، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Firstly, I would like to begin by emphasising and mentioning some realities. Although the act of terrorism that was committed on the soil of Christchurch was committed by an Australian, this does not mean that all Australians hold the same extremist view. Islamophobia is not a new problem, nor was it the result of the September 11 attacks. Rather, it started well before that time. Right-wing extremists have adopted Islamophobia as their way. And there have been certain published texts in the world around us that have exacerbated this view. The existence of terrorism that killed worshippers in Masjid an-Nur in Christchurch and Linwood Islamic Centre was the result of a cultural misexpression that has been allowed to brew among certain academics and researchers, as well as individuals in various media outlets and those who are in the political arena, while some of these people still hold power and positions of influence in their own countries. When the massacre occurred in Christchurch on March 15, 2019, with 51 Muslims being killed and terrorised and about the same injured, news reports later on stated that that terrorist had been influenced by certain right-wing extremist groups and politicians, with an individual at the top of that list being former US President Donald Trump. It's also been mentioned that he's been influenced by French anti-immigration writer Renaud Camus, Norwegian right-wing extremist Anders Breivik, who committed the 2011 terrorist attack killing 77 people, as well as Dylan Roof, an American white supremacist, neo-Nazi and mass murderer. If we agree that there are extremists all around the world in both the East and the West, we find that those that operate in the East are perhaps operating against the law and a little more contained. We generally find them in prisons or perhaps in their own hideouts in cave or within mountains. But the greater problem is that the extremists in the Western lands still exist. Not only do they exist, but they also exist amongst those who legislate, and this provides ample room for extremism to exist. Right-wing groups have branched out in many places of the world and reached positions of power, with those holding views opposing their own immigrant people reaching the highest positions of leadership in Western countries. Movements that hold these views have gained momentum, such as Alternative for Germany, Identity Bloc in France and the English Defence League. In this way, we can say that the flame of Islamophobia is lit around the world through writings and activism of its proponents. Everyone should know, particularly those responsible for legislation, that being silent in the face of the rise of hatred and far-right extremism will lead to an imbalance will lead to an absence of justice. When this occurs, a land will be plagued by homegrown terrorism, as there are little protective measures internally. If the entire world has come together as an alliance to combat ISIL, including 68 countries, in the name of combating terrorism, then isn't it also vital that these countries of the world come together as an alliance against far-right extremism and Islamophobia? Every sincere human being in the world desires peace for his or her people to live in harmony, far from being harmed and killed. We pray to Allah, the Almighty, to protect our land Australia from all evil, to guide its people so that love and peace remain our goals. And may the peace, mercy and blessings of God be upon you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, and also Imam Ahmed Abdul. Before we move to the next speakers, I just want to convey we received a message from the Prime Minister, the Honourable Scott Morrison, Member of Parliament, and I want to briefly share the words which he has communicated by way of this letter. I regret that I cannot be with you today as Parliament is sitting in Canberra. Today we remember the appalling act of terrorism in Christchurch that took place on this day 2 years ago. We remember and honour the victims, send our love to the survivors and stand with the families and loved ones who are rebuilding their lives. It was a day none of us can forget, an assault on a quiet nation, one beloved by all Australians. In the sad aftermath, the sails of our Opera House were illuminated by the silver fern of New Zealand, and we nursed the wounds of our family across the ditch. Our wanahu, the intensity of that message echoes in my heart, and it is joined by emotions of love and pride for how everyone responded in the days and months that followed that terrible day. Like you, I know that faith is about community, and it is from community that we draw strength. I honour the Islamic community in Australia for everything you have done supporting the Islamic community of New Zealand following the attack on the mosques. Tonight's gathering is another reflection of that support. We remember that across other countries and communities of faith there were prayers, support and tears for our Muslim brothers and sisters, a reminder not of our differences but of our similarities. On this anniversary, I honour the Australian Police, forensic specialists, victim support officers and intelligence analysts who travelled to New Zealand to support and assist in a work of healing. While that task has ended, the work continues. Our work is to reject extremism in every form, break the cycle of those who try to propagate hate, and to strive to see the us in our national life, an Australia of different faiths and every possible background. This is the work of today and always. I am grateful to you as we face this great work to conquer the darkness of hate with the light of compassion and mercy. Thank you to the Prime Minister for those words and the sentiment. Before I introduce our next two speakers, if I can just share, by way of introduction, some comments. Firstly, it's so very important to hear directly from people who tend to face the vitriol and barbs of the hate that is prevalent and around us. It tends to be directed, sadly, at those who are vulnerable, often women, even on this day as there are marches occurring across the country to recognise the plight of women. And it's so that we can appreciate the magnitude, the significance, the reality of the experience relating to Islamophobia, which of course underpinned and culminated in the murderous rage which played out in New Zealand 2 years ago. We will have two sisters address us tonight. One of them, Rana Al-Asma, some of you may recall, she was involved in a horrific incident in Parramatta in November 2019 when she was set upon, visibly Muslim by virtue of her veil, set upon, beaten, enduring extraordinary violence which so many of us could not even imagine. I certainly can't. And pulled through that. So we will hear directly from her as to her exposure and the day-to-day realities and challenges that she faces, particularly given her Muslim identity. We will also hear from Ramia Sultan, who is the Community Relations Manager with the Australian National Imams Council, and in that role she also has direct exposure to so many people, women in particular, who share anecdotes and experiences and fears that so many of us don't have to worry about. We take for granted our privileges, our safeties, but there are many who do have to very carefully think through these things, day in, day out. And it's easy to forget that. So, on that note, I will ask Sisters Rana and Ramia to come forward, please, and speak of their experiences.
Good evening. My name is Rana Al-Asma. On the night of the 20th of November 2019, I became a victim of a vicious and unprovoked physical attack. I had no affiliation or previous contact with the perpetrator. This was an attack purely based on my Islamic faith, made evident through my veil, and also because I am a woman. I believe this because of Stipe's history of violence. The common thread of violence against women, Muslim women in particular. Stipe also made comments about Muslims before beginning his attack. And as I felt every blow, I came to realise that he was not intending to stop, and if nobody had intervened, I could have been killed. As Stipe approached our table that night with an outstretched arm, he asked for money. However, I knew immediately that his intentions were sinister, because as he was asking for money, he was not looking at the but rather examining each and every one of us at the table as he spoke. As he turned to ask me next, he stopped halfway through his sentence to scream, "You Muslims raped my mum." He then began his attack. I made a conscious effort to turn my abdomen away from his punches, as I was heavily pregnant and wanted to protect my unborn baby. I remember continually making dua, a prayer to God, for the protection of my baby and I. I chose to wear the hijab about 7 years ago. It was my choice, and nobody had the right to take that away from me. Stipe needed to be made an example of. However, he was sentenced to 3 years. This may seem sufficient to some. However, it needs to be understood that this sentence will be served concurrently with another sentence. Also, the judge backdated the start of his sentence to the 4th of June 2020, meaning that he had already served part of his sentence while once again already being incarcerated for another crime. Further, he may apply for parole after 2 years. This means that when Stipe Lazina was sentenced, the severe physical assault accounted for an additional 1 year and 8 months in jail. He not only endangered my life, but also the life of my son Zayn, and the criminal justice system felt that 1 year and 8 months was a sufficient enough sentence for such an aggressive, premeditated attack. In the moments after the attack, I was shocked and disappointed at the comments that followed. Patrons of the cafe who had witnessed the attack said things like, "I thought he was your husband," or "I thought you knew him." This is a mindset that needs to shift. No matter who the person is, we are equal as human beings, and nobody deserves to be abused in that way. This change starts here and now. I was raised in a way that sees no difference between people, colour, race, religion. We are all equal. In a country like Australia, where we pride ourselves on our rich diversity, our foods, languages, religions, cultures, all harmoniously integrated in this beautiful land. Islamophobic attacks are the product of hate and are as un-Australian as they come. In Islam, we believe that a smile is a form of charity. It shows kindness, acceptance, and tolerance. We are not hateful people. We are warm, welcoming, and accepting. When attacks like these occur, we must come together to support one another and make it known loud and clear that this is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. Women in Australia, particularly Muslim women, are extremely vulnerable. The attack had long-lasting psychological effects, but also physical ones. I walked away with bruising, lumps, severe ear pain, the inability to chew due to jaw pain, and continuous migraines and ear pain. My husband, mother and sister left their jobs, tasks, duties to be by my side, to help support my children and I, to care for them and give me the support that I needed while I recovered from the head pain and loss of concentration. They are amazing, strong people. I'm so thankful to have them in my life. The effects extended to my children. My daughter, who was only 6 at the time, saw glimpses of the attack on TV. She got told by classmates that it was her mother, and then came and asked me about it. The hurt I saw in her eyes broke me into pieces. How do I explain to my daughter why this man hit me? For the following months, I needed to comfort my daughter every time I left the house. I needed to explain to her that it was a bad person and they aren't everywhere, and that I would not be attacked again, that I would return home alive. I should not have to have this conversation with a 6-year-old. I needed to comfort her and show her my resilience and strength. I only hope that I have been a good example to her of what a strong woman should be. My 5-year-old son was also affected greatly. He now believes many people we come across in shopping centres, parks, wherever we may go, are bad people. He's constantly fearful and warns me when he sees what he believes is a bad person. He and his sister run to me if they see someone passing by the front of our house. To have my children fear for their safety in their own home is ridiculous. If my daughter were to grow up and decide to wear the hijab, I want to know that hate crimes like these are reprimanded heavily to deter future attacks. Islamophobia needs to end. It's time to step up, speak out, and make a change. Thank you.
I thank Rana for her bravery and courage to share her story, and I don't think any of us could not have felt touched by her story. We're all humans, we're all individuals, we have children who may have to, God forbid, witness something as horrible as this. And I thank you for stepping up and sharing your story, because I don't think we are ever given enough opportunities to have our voices heard. So thank you immensely. I'd like to share with you all some snippets from an opinion piece I wrote, which was published in The Guardian yesterday. As the news of the Christchurch massacre began to unfold in March 2009, where in the initial moments I received countless notifications on my phone of what appeared to be the same message being circulated in the many groups I'm in, I did not realise that what I would come to watch would be something I could never unsee and never unhear, where the ruthless and calculated gunshots would haunt me even 2 years on. I took a corner in my office, and the apparently strong, confident lawyer in me, completely shaken, wept in disbelief. Was this really happening to our neighbour in New Zealand? It was so close to home, it shook me to the core. The thing that made it more unbearable was the fact that the Christchurch terrorist was one of us, an Australian. How could an Australian, someone I could have possibly crossed paths with here at home, be so full of hate that one day he would plan out something as horrific as the Christchurch massacre? Is Australia home to this much hate and bigotry unbeknown to us all? The event that took place on 15th of March 2019 have made me reflect a lot on things I either never saw or perhaps chose not to see. I realised that Christchurch was never an unforeseen circumstance. There was always a lead up to it. How is it okay to sit in Parliament and call Islam a disease, or refer to a final solution when talking to Muslim presence in society? How is it okay to turn up to Parliament wearing and ridiculing religious attire, or claim that it was a mistake to let a cohort of Muslim immigrants come to Australia in the 1970s? It is comments like these and statements such as this that contribute to severe hatred. For Muslims, attending the mosque is an opportunity for attendees to literally leave the chaos and worries of life outside and switch into an introspective state to do some soul-searching and refocusing. The moment any attendee enters the mosque, especially on a Friday, they become separated from the world, given a chance to take a break, pause and breathe. But this sacred moment was torn away from every victim that day, not just from the victims on that day, but from all Muslims entering a mosque after the Christchurch massacre. 2 years on, and I still hold my heart each time my family and I attend our local mosque. What if another tyrant decides to show up? Here, I realise despite 2 years passing, my community and I have not completely healed. We are still grieving and mourning not only the victims, but for how hate and bigotry led to such an extreme act of violence. The Islamophobia Australia report released in November 2019 showed us that Islamophobia in Australia does exist and is a persistent social issue that overwhelmingly targets women who are visibly Muslim due to their hijab and places of worship such as mosques. Hence, it becomes our duty as bystanders, policymakers and law changers to question and assess what protective legislative measures are in place to better protect minority communities, including Australian Muslims, from Islamophobia. Better measures, which will hold perpetrators to account, need to be implemented in order to monitor both online and offline hatred and violent extremism to ensure that another Christchurch will never happen again. Our hearts and prayers are with the victims of Christchurch and their families, and I pray for tolerance, peace, love to guide humanity always. Thank you.
It takes great courage to come forward with such personal accounts and experiences, particularly in a hall full of people, to open your soul in that way. So can I ask you again to join your hands to thank Sisters Rana Al-Asma and Rania. As we have heard, the effects of hate and prejudice reverberate long after a particular act or event. They tend to be felt by those most vulnerable. For the Australian Muslim community, it tends to be the women who are readily identifiable by their religious veil because they choose to wear it, or indeed men with little support or command of the English language working on factory floors and warehouses. At the Australian National Imams Council, we hear of these incidents repeatedly, and we are asked what's being done. Are we not Australians? Are we not part of this country? Are we not working as other Australians? So why then are we sidelined? Are we ignored? While others clamour about freedom of speech, we don't have the freedom to even speak without fear of reprisal or attack. And we tell them that, well, federally, we are working towards lending support for a religious discrimination bill. They ask us, well, will it protect us against vilification? Sadly, we explain that it's a little bit more challenging than that. There are more hues to vilification. The hue that you talk about isn't seen so clearly, but we're working on it. At a state level, we have also been supporting the religious discrimination bill, and in New South Wales, most attributes are protected legislatively. Extraordinarily, there is no protection for religious identity or faith. In that same legislative framework, there is protection for some, added protection against vilification. There are provisions that have existed for long, but only for certain grounds, not your religious identity. So, if you are a Lebanese or Pakistani Australian woman wearing a scarf and discriminated against or vilified because of your ethnicity or gender, you might have some recourse. But if the same woman is vilified or discriminated against because she holds close to her heart her faith and wishes to identify with it, then there is no recourse, except perhaps the comfort of words in the wind which quickly fade. And sadly, that's the most common type of discrimination that we hear of within the community. There are those that point to Section 93Z of the Crimes Act, which, as some of you know, makes it an offence of publicly threatening or inciting violence on various grounds, including religion. Since its enactment on 21 June 2018 until very recently, it's never been used. It sits as a glittering adornment that gives little comfort. I understand that there were recently 2 prosecutions and that they are to be annulled because prior consent of the DPP was not obtained, pointing towards the bureaucratic and convoluted nature of the provision. As to its lack of use or improper use, a common rejoinder is that it may not be needed, or in fact our society is in a healthy position. Sadly, it's a rejoinder emanating from those who tend to have little insight of the challenges and experiences of those in our community who suffer. Not necessarily many of us here, including me, but certainly those who tend not to have a voice. I only wish those who give that rejoinder would take the time to speak to those who face the barbs and vitriol of the hate and prejudice which is directed at some among us day in, day out. And we have heard some of that from Sisters Rana and Ramia. There are many other stories, many other direct experiences. Now, I want to move to our next speaker, the Honourable Dr. Jeff Lee, Minister for Sport, Multiculturalism, Seniors and Veterans. If I can ask you all to put your hands together to welcome Dr. Jeff Lee.
Assalamu alaikum. And can I start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of their land, their elders past, present and emerging, and pay respects as is the oldest living culture in the world today. Can I thank Sheikh Shadi and Anik for organising tonight's gathering to remember Christchurch. Can I also recognise the Grand Mufti, Dr. Ibrahim. Can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, and there's Jodie McKay, Mark Curray, Jihad Dip, Julia Finn, Paul Lynch, Penny Sharp, Linda Volts, and can I especially acknowledge all our community leaders, our religious leaders and our civil leaders here today, because tonight's a special night. On behalf of the New South Wales Government, I extend our deepest sympathies for the victims and families of the devastating attacks 2 years ago today on the mosque in Christchurch. We are mindful that 2 years ago the wounds are still healing. Friday 15th March 2019 and the days, weeks and months that followed it was a dark time for New Zealanders. It was also a dark time for Australians. Knowing how deeply the pain was felt, my agency, Multicultural New South Wales, reached out directly to community members in New South Wales who were affected by those atrocities. People from all walks of life came together for vigil prayers across New South Wales in a display of cross-cultural and cross-faith solidarity. We extended our thoughts and prayers along with them. Immediately following the attack in Christchurch, the Premier attended Friday prayer vigil at Lakemba Mosque, standing in solidarity with Muslim community along with multi-faith and religious leaders and parliamentary colleagues from both sides. The sails of the Opera House were lit with a silver fern in a show of sympathy and love for our New Zealand cousins. These attacks on innocent people clearly demonstrate terrorism can reach out to all corners of the world. New South Wales is renowned as a peaceful, harmonious, multicultural, multi-faith society. Being a multicultural community means that we're connected to the world. This connection brings all kinds of benefits to our state. However, it means that when conflict and strife do occur, both here and overseas, our communities in New South Wales also feel the pain. And can I thank Rana for sharing your personal story tonight? And I think, Rana, can I say you provide not an excellent role model to not only your family but your children, and you're a smart, intelligent and articulate young person, and can I commend you and thank you for sharing your deeply moving story tonight. The devastating terrorist attack on our neighbours and cousins in Christchurch was also especially felt deeply by communities here. We extend our message of support to all our Muslim brothers and sisters, neighbours and colleagues. The message remains clear. However hard extremists try to divide us, the people of New South Wales will stand united. In today's times, more than ever, it is important that we stand against them all. We need to safeguard the values that bind us together and stand us up and stand united for a peaceful and harmonious way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffley. Can I next ask the Honourable Jodie Mackay, MP Leader of the Opposition, Shadow Minister for Multiculturalism, to please come forward, and can I ask you to please join me in welcoming her as well.
Thank you very much, Bilal. Good evening, everyone. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I want to acknowledge Your Eminence, Dr. Ibrahim. It is always good to see you. To you, Sheikh Shadi, thank you, and thank you to ANEC for organising this very special event. I know that this is the second anniversary, but of course last year we couldn't commemorate it properly, so it's wonderful to see everyone here. I also want to acknowledge the many imams who are present here tonight and other religious leaders, and thank you all for the great privilege of being here with you on this very special commemoration, and it's an honour to be with you. I also just want to make mention of Rana and Ramia. I've heard Ramia speak before, and you always impress. Rana, sharing your story is so hard, but you are brave, and you are a Muslim woman who wears a hijab, and that you are targeted and that you are exposed like you were is unacceptable. And I feel for you, I say sorry to you, and please know that we are there to support you. And thank you for being so brave. Thank you for being so brave and sharing your story. Thank you. As we've heard tonight, and as we know, the terrorist attack in Christchurch occurred 2 years ago today at the Al Noor Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Centre. We know that 51 innocent people died and countless others were injured. It shocked all of us to the core here in Australia and in New Zealand, and it reverberated around the globe. Yes, it was the horrific death toll that made us weep, but those that were killed and injured were attacked at their sacred place of worship where they had gathered in peace to pray. And in every way, the events of that day offended our sense of who we are and what we hold dear. 2 years on, Muslims in New Zealand and Australia are still grieving for fathers, for mothers, for sons, for daughters, for neighbours, for friends. So much sadness, too much sadness. Sadness that was captured in a photo of Jacinda Ardern taking a woman in her arms, which has become a symbol, a powerful symbol of empathy, of understanding and forgiveness, but also of sadness. In the hours and the days that followed the attack, it was so powerful to see the values of friendship and of good citizenship, of love, affirmed so strongly against a terrible attempt to divide the community. We saw non-Muslims laying flowers at the door of the mosque. We saw strangers embracing. But here in Australia, our country and our community faced an additional responsibility, because the terrorist who committed this atrocity was not a New Zealander. He was not a New Zealander. He was a guest there. He was an Australian citizen. In this country, each and every one of us have an obligation to do everything in our power to make sure an atrocity like this never happens again. And tonight's memorial is part of that, and I thank ANEC sincerely for organising this and reminding us of what is dear to each of us. So thank you, Sheikh Shadi. Tonight we reaffirm that no matter where we come from, what our cultural beliefs are, what our religious beliefs are, we should feel safe, respected and valued, each and every one of us. Here in Australia, we must do more to call out Islamophobia and other forms of racial and religious hatred. And you're right, Bilal, we must do better in the Parliament, we must. We must do more to educate our fellow citizens, including our young people. We must do more to protect everyone from racial violence and hate speech. And those who resort to the ugliness of bigotry and racial politics must be held to account. We owe this to the 51 victims, those who were injured, to their families, to the Muslim community, to our multicultural and multi-faith society. Finally, may all of those who perished 2 years ago never fade. May the memory never fade. May all those who suffered, who still suffer, be cared for and supported in New Zealand and by all of us here in Australia. And may our society continue to work towards a better world and a kinder, more respectful society, free from terrorism, violence and hatred. And yes, as Dr. Ibrahim said, let love and peace remain our goals. Thank you.
Can I thank the Honourable Jodie Mackay for her words, and can I echo what she said, that may we never forget the names of those who were killed. And as we draw close to the end of the formal proceedings this evening, can I return to where I started, and that is that we do recollect and remember the names in the hope that their memory will drive us to something more positive. On that note, can I ask Sheikh Ibrahim Dadoun and also Sister Mariam Ardati to come forward, please, to recite the names of those who were murdered.
سيد علي أحمد فرهج أحسن محسن محمد الحربي أشرف علي رزت أشرف علي سيد جهندر علي حسين العمري ليندا سوزان أرمسترونغ موسى نور أوالي زكريا بويا كمال محمد كمال درويش عطاء محمد عطاء الأيام علي محمد عبد الله المدني عبد القادر المين محمد عمر فاروق مسعد إبراهيم جنيد إسماعيل أمجد قاسم حميد ليلي عبد الحميد مجمل حق وزير كثير أنس
هارون محمود سيد أحمد مني محمد موسى محمد حسن محمد حازم محمد تلميذي حسين محمد خليل مصطفى حجي محمد داوود نبي طارق رشيد عمر إمام موسى غالي سليمان عتيق عبد الفتاح قاسم أشرف المرسي راغب متين البنصار محمد عبد الصمد محمد سهيل شائب منير جرجس سليمان خالد موفق الحاج مصطفى حمزة خالد الحاج مصطفى غلام حسين كرم ديني محمد زيشان بازر نعيم رشيد طلحة نعيم رشيد عريف محمد علي روحي رامز البهاري روحي زكريا تويان
And may we never forget the names, the sadness, pain and horror of what occurred in Christchurch. May the memory of those names motivate us to become stronger as a society and united in opposing hate, acts of division and prejudice. And may the names remind us that the change begins here and now, so that next time there is any hint of hate or prejudice, we are more active in raising our voices to oppose it. And to finish the proceedings tonight, I'll ask Imam Ahmed Abdur to recite a supplication.
O Allah, the giver of life, the bestower of death, we send prayers and salutations upon our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Indeed, to you we belong, and to you shall be our return. Each of the 51 Muslims who were martyred in Christchurch 2 years ago, we ask you, O Allah, to raise their ranks, to cast upon them an eternal radiant light that shines from their resting place on earth to the highest garden in paradise. O Allah, the persecution and agony they experienced on that Friday, where they visited your house seeking nearness to you through their devotional prayers, we ask you to replace their pain with an everlasting vision of your countenance in the garden of paradise. O Allah, they were followers of the pure and peaceful path of the last messenger, our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, going to drink from his practice on that blessed day of Friday. We beseech you, Lord of the heavens and earth, to grant them a drink from the blessed hand of your messenger, at the basin of the Hawd, a drink which they will never become thirsty afterwards. O Allah, you saved Ibrahim from the flames of the fire. You saved Yunus from the belly of the whale. You saved Yusuf from the darkness of the well. You saved Noah from the overflowing waters of the earth. You saved Musa from the tyranny of Pharaoh. And you saved our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of you be upon all the prophets and messengers, from the oppression of his own people in the city of Mecca. O Allah, you alone do we devote ourselves to, and you alone do we seek support. In the same way, you have joined our lands of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, with the deep blue Tasman Sea. We ask you, O Allah, to combine and strengthen our efforts in removing hatred and harm from the minds and hearts of all those who call these lands home. As you saved previous people from the injustice of their times, only you can save us from all forms of evil. We ask you, O Allah, to allow Canberra to live up to its original indigenous meaning and to be that meeting place for peace, security and prosperity for our country, an example for the entire world, standing firm against white supremacy and Islamophobia. O Allah, protect our people's hearts, minds, homes, places of worship and lands, and do not allow us to witness one more drop of innocent blood to touch this earth. Ameen.
Thank you again, everyone, for your attendance tonight. It means a lot. It reflects that we can come together in heart, in mind, even in moments of sadness, and move towards the light. So I thank you all, and with that, it brings the evening to an end. But please feel free to remain. There'll be food and refreshments served in the back section, so please mingle, please meet, please build bridges, and thank you again. Good evening, everyone.